Hi, everybody. Welcome. We're just waiting as people start to slowly filter in. Feel free to use the chat box to introduce yourself and where you're coming from today. And we'll get started once everybody's in a couple of minutes. Welcome, everybody. We'll get started in just a couple moments, but if you haven't done so already, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat box. We'll get started once we get everybody into the room. Okay. I still see numbers climbing, so I'm just going to wait one more minute. If you haven't done so, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat box. And good to see so many people coming to such an important conversation. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Thank you, everyone, for joining the water cooler chat on environmental justice in ecological research and education. My name is Jessica Johnston. I'm the Education Programs Coordinator with ESA. Before we start, I'm just going to go over the rules of engagement with today's meeting, and then I'll introduce our guest hosts. So, for the water cooler chat process, this is an informal discussion with all ideas and experiences welcome, which is a great way for us to share information. We highly encourage you to share information, but there's a couple of ways we ask you to do this. In order to join the conversation, we ask you to either click on the participant list that's at the in the toolbar and use your little blue hand to raise your hand, and we can call upon you to ask a question. Or you could also type your question or comment directly into the chat box itself. And if you really want to speak, then sometimes we'll call upon you and then you can unmute your mic. But in the meantime, we please ask you to keep your mics muted so that we don't have a lot of feedback or people talking over each other. The more comments and posts and resources shared in the chat box, the better, and the more engaged the whole experience is for everyone. And I did want to acknowledge that we are recording this event today. So if you do not want your name to be exposed, you can change your name, or you can also close your camera out so that your face isn't on the recording. That being said, please let me welcome our three very special guests today. We have Carmen Sid, who's an urban forest and wetland ecologist, professor in ecology and Dean of the Arts and Sciences at the University of Connecticut State University. Sorry. For many years, she's worked with ESA to increase diversity of ecologists and elevate the human dimensions and teaching of ecology. She's the incoming vice president of the governing board for education and diversity, and I'm very happy to have Carmen here. In addition, we have Gillian Bowser, who's a research scientist in the Natural Resources Ecology Lab, where her research focuses on ecological indicators of climate change. She's previously worked in wildlife biologist and ecologist for the National Park Service and currently serves on the board for the Rocky Mountain Sustainability and Science Network. And finally, we have Amber Finley, who is an enrolled member of the Mandan Hidatsa Irikara Nation, or 3 affiliated tribes, and a descendant of the Spirit Lake Dakota and Standing Rock Lakota. She serves as the science faculty and director of research and development at the Nueta Hidatsa Sanish College in Newtown, North Dakota, and she serves as the secretary of the environmental justice section of ESA. So with that being said, welcome to our special guests, and you all can take it over from here.
Hello, my name is Amber Finley. I have been involved with ESA mostly from my involvement starting with SEEDS, the SEEDS program. And so that's how I came to know the Ecological Society of America. I am relatively new to the environmental justice section. So although I'm an officer and I'm serving with my other 2 colleagues that have also been part of SEEDS, my involvement has been relatively short-lived, but I'm excited to do some of this work. And I'm really excited that you guys were putting on a water cooler talk. So when I seen this happening, I kind of just felt like it was important to be part of the conversation, because one of the things that we're trying to do with our environmental justice section is really to expand that network and to really get more people engaged. Over the next year here, we'd like to host our own sort of sessions similar to this, where we gather people around environmental justice topics. And so hopefully out of this talk today, we'll have a better network of people that can speak on those topics with us and kind of expand our knowledge of what is really going on in environmental justice right now and how it connects to the other pieces of ecology as a discipline, and how we teach it to other students as well. And so that's really kind of the focus of where I'm coming from as wanting to be part of this conversation. I also have my other 2 officers. They will be joining us, and so you'll hear from them as well, Jeremy Strickland and Jorge Ramos. And I did notice that Leanne and Charles and I'm sorry, I seen the other guy on here too. George, they
is
were
there
all
too.
on here.
The 3 founders.
Yep. So yes, and so we're really lucky to have them here because they really are the heart and soul of the environmental justice section. And I don't want to take up too much time because I'd like us to get right into conversation. So I'm going to go ahead and yield to Carmen and Gillian so that they can say a few words as well.
I'm very happy to be here too. Gillian and I have been working on trying to elevate the human dimension and especially environmental justice into research and teaching of ecology. And I'm part of the task force that is working on the 4-dimensional ecology education curricula framework that the Ecological Society of America approved and endorsed in 2018. And George Mittendorf, who was part of the founding of the environmental justice section, is the chair of that task force. So environmental justice has been all along integrated into many of our ESA education initiatives, but now even more so it is needed, and it connects directly with the new task force on diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice, which has recommended that environmental justice be elevated in the teaching of ecology and in research. And so that was approved very recently in November 10th by the Ecological Society of America Governing Board. So this is the time to talk, and this is the time to get together, to gather those who care about and who are already doing work in environmental justice, and develop an action plan to keep this momentum going. So Gillian, there you are.
Hi, thanks, Carmen. Hi, my name is Gillian Bowser. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Ecosystem Science and Sustainability at Colorado State University. And I guess you could call me a recovering board member from ESA and a recovering section leader from the Applied Ecology section. So I was a section leader for quite some time. So we get back there with George and Charlie and others. And it's nice to see all these guys online. Part of what I guess, brought us to this conversation, and sort of a quick shout out to Wiley Publications, that there is an environmental justice collection that's now available for free for 1 year on the ESA website. Obviously, it was the Black Lives Matters that happened this spring, but also the Chris Cooper incident, which maybe everyone who's not heard of should have heard of in this field. And you put those concatenations together with a recent NSF report that shows simply an appalling and continuing lack of diversity in the environmental sciences. And the numbers haven't changed much since, I think it was like 2004. It's just been flat. So part of what got Carmen and I sort of started on trying to think about how to get ecologists to think about environmental justice, and simply ask the question, what is the connection between environmental justice and our sort of appalling lack of diversity in the field? And is some of this coming from within the discipline itself, on how we view field experiences, how we view access to knowledge, how we view access to nature, how we view co-creating questions with communities and who those communities are. So that's part of the conversation that we're hoping to happen and get started among the ecology, the Ecological Society of America, is how do we address the diversity and inclusion, and how do we address the importance of environmental justice and climate justice as two emerging concepts in the field of ecology. And I have really bad internet, so I will probably keep my video off for most of the time. Thank you.
So we invite your questions. Our numbers keep going up. And as I said,
oh, sorry, Carmen, there's a question in the box which says, Kate Tara, I apologize if I mispronounced your name. Access to nature is a major EJ issue which causes a lack of representation in the field. You cannot be what you cannot see. I think that's an interesting, and I'm sure Amber has a lot to say with this as well. I think there's essentially two problems of thinking about access to nature, and beyond just does somebody get outside, but what is their experience when they get outside? And then also, what is nature? I'm from New York City, and I have to say, and I'm sure Charlie and George are having the giggles over there, but the common perception that urban environments are not connected to nature is one place that we start up, which I think is wrong-footed. That, nature is everywhere. It's every piece of air we breathe and water that we breathe. So thinking about how we define access to nature is an important part of thinking about environmental justice. So, and I think we have to broaden our perception of where justice issues occur, especially when you get to climate issues. And we also have to broaden our perception, which is what we were trying to do with the collection, of also what are the mechanisms that cause the environmental justice to begin with. And that is where ecology sort of comes in. So it's more than just, well, you didn't get to the local national park, so therefore access to nature is preventing you from ever being an ecologist. We have to think broader than that. Like, that's what I'd like to see. But I want to hear what my other panelists have to say.
I'd have to agree with you. I believe, sorry, that really it's not about access to nature. It's about how are we making ecology more appealing to students of color. I mean, really there's not a whole lot of people that look like us in that field. And so for the most part, growing up, we don't see that as an option. We don't see that as a particular field to study. At least I can speak from my own experience. When I was growing up, most of the time you hear, become a doctor, become a lawyer, become some of those more mainstream professions that you associate with making money. and you don't really think about how you can study nature and be part of science and still be able to provide for your family and have a future in that sort of profession. And so for us, it's not the lack of access to nature itself, it's the lack of access to the profession itself. And I think that's all I really want to say right now. I kind of would like to see where this conversation keeps going.
And I noticed that Jeremy Strickland has joined us. So who's the current vice chair or incoming chair? So Jeremy, say hello.
Hello, everyone. I jumped on a little late. I'm trying to multitask 2 Zoom rooms. So hello, everyone. My name is Jeremy Strickland. I'm the manager of education and community outreach with Open Lands. Pleased to be with you all, and I'd be happy to take any questions that we might have. So sorry if I missed the first couple points of it, but yeah, if you have any questions that you'd like to address or run by me, I'd be happy to share some of the things we're doing in the Chicagoland area, trying to connect urban audiences to nature and conservation. We're currently putting on a series of climate clinics for educators, where we're getting educators in the room so that they can deliver climate science to, if we wait till they get into college, it's too late. And so we're trying to incorporate climate science into K-12 education. So if anybody has any ideas or any suggestions, I'd be happy to follow up with you afterwards. Great to see everyone.
As Teresa Murad has indicated to us, environmental justice has been part of the discussion for the Ecological Society of America for a while, quite a while. But ecologists are still reluctant of approaching it as a valid source of research or area of research to continue. And the students sometimes pick up on this, and they think that perhaps environmental justice is something that they can pursue as a career, but not as an ecologist. They can see it as something that they can do from the social science fields, that sometimes the undergraduates may feel they have to switch over to a different career path to continue doing environmental justice. And the word environment requires that we put some ecology into it. So we're trying to advocate for more ecology into the study of environmental justice questions. And that's where all of you come in, because you are either interested or already involved in doing that. So we'd love to hear from you.
Hi, I see that Ann Mayo has her hand up. Would you like to speak, Ann?
Yeah, I would. Thank you, Amber. I'm really excited to be in this meeting with all of you wonderful people. A lot of, I guess across our country, maybe the world, and in different professional societies, we've really been talking a lot more about that diversity and inclusion and equity. And so I've gotten a lot more interested in what people of a variety of perspectives would have to say about those kinds of things. And I've just started reading some even historians who are critiquing how they do history and how do you include other non-white, non-Western perspectives in, listen to that. So I kind of want to raise that to this group, because it seems to me perhaps part of what we struggle with is that there is at least still a primary tendency to do science ecology from a Western perspective, and with those kind of values. People who come from other perspectives that we want to include that are already part of ESA may be really uncomfortable with that terminology, with the connection of, for instance, colonization with what's happened to Native peoples or indigenous peoples. So it may be that in confronting some of that, we might find avenues to open this up and be more inclusive at these more basic levels. Anyway, I just wanted to raise that as a possibility, or get your feedback or some help for myself to engage that more fully.
Thanks, Anne. I guess I'll jump in. This is Gillian Bowser from Colorado State University. And I'm just loving the chat, because the box size got a little sidetracked on there. But I think, one of the problems, and I'll just speak as an African American, is that we we want to divide the world into, and I hope Amber and others will sort of also jump in here, because it's complicated. It's not just Western and non-Western, or non-white and non-Western. Yeah, Native peoples have different perspectives, but African Americans have different perspectives as well, as do Latinx and others. And thinking about how all those different perspectives, especially when you move into a larger scale of climate justice, is looked at, it's really important. So, you know, I guess going back a little bit to the access issue, and sort of even just how we view conservation, how we view a wilderness area, and what goes on in a wilderness area. And you could say, well, the wilderness is a Western construct. If you go to different countries, the term wilderness is very often used in very different contexts, you know, where you have people and other things embedded in a protected area. But what we don't ask is, within the US, where we do have a common definition, what does Western mean? Is it, don't know other way to put it. Is it just the white people of the United States who think one way? Because I think for African Americans, for Native Americans, for Hispanic and others, we may think about that conservation, that wilderness area, in very different ways. And so, for example, one of the things that you look at when you look at the environmental justice collection and sort of ask the questions about justice and where access becomes a question, is there a word that I would say African Americans use more about access to nature that arguably most white Americans would not use at all in context with nature? And that word is security. Do you feel safe in that wilderness area? I'm not talking about the safe from a grizzly bear. I'm talking about the safe from the people. And that context is what happened with Chris Cooper on the same day that George Floyd happened. You know, the context of having the police being called on you while you're out in the field doing birding. The context of being asked ID when you go out into a field location, even though you're standing next to a university vehicle. So this is an issue of safety that some populations experience in wild and Western spaces that others do not. So the conversation becomes really different depending on who you are. And it's important to sort of acknowledge where those pieces are. But I thought I'd say, look, like Amber or Jeremy was going to jump up and say something, but here's other views.
No, not me.
You're just the largest face on my screen. How you doing, Jeremy?
How's it going?
Pretty good.
No, I wasn't about to say anything, but if you had a specific question you'd like me to address, I'd be more than happy to. I'm just trying to monitor the chat as well. So yeah, throw any questions you might have at me. I mean, from the start of it, you know, working in Chicago, being from Chicago, being involved with the ESA, the Ecological Society, the SIEGE program, I just wanted to put it out there with the members and the partners that we've made tremendous strides to diversify the profession of ecology so that some of these more urban voices are heard. So kudos to everybody in their efforts. I think we come a long way, but we can have a long way to go. And us interacting and engaging in these conversations are definitely the way to go. But, you know, I kept preaching and I keep preaching that if we wait to get students and audiences involved, you know, at the college level, I think we're missing out on a tremendous talent pool. We have to start at the K-12 education, whether it's assigning our college students to be mentors and going to some of the high schools to teach environmental justice and some of the issues that we might face at a high school level. And then those high school students can, you know, be peer mentors at the lower level. Yeah, I mean, we just can't wait till these folks get in college because I feel like it's too late. And so kudos to everybody that's on this call who's participating and collaborating. You know, the best is yet to come. I can't be more prouder to be affiliated with a better organization and the affiliates that are involved.
So I think I may have alluded to this a little bit earlier, that I did not stay as involved with Ecological Society of America, mostly because there are other societies out there that kind of cater to minorities. In my case, it's the American Indian Science and Engineering Society. It's a place where I do feel safe. It's a place where I can see my culture and identity. And I see other people like me that are in either similar professions as myself or in some STEM field. And so there's very little of us out there that are actually hold bachelor's degrees or even master's degrees in a STEM field. And so, and when I say us, I mean Indigenous people. And so we become a very small percentage. And then you know, try to get us to insert ourselves into larger universities. And we can say Western or mainstream or whatever, but what we really mean is predominantly white. I mean, that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about places where we feel out of place. So you go to a space where you're already out of place and then you're asked to do something that's outside of your comfort zone. And so it becomes a mission of that university, if they're serious about having students of color participate fully in the experience of learning, that they have to make sure that they're accommodating who they are as an individual or who they are as a cultural component. So I was lucky enough to go to the University of North Dakota, where at that time they had American Indian Student Services. And so they had a lot of support system there, and we were able to have other people we identified with that were either of the same tribe or of tribes from North Dakota that were working with us to make sure that we were successful at the university. And unfortunately, that program has now been sort of swallowed up with multicultural student services. And that tends to be the way that most universities are going nowadays, where they're taking these individualized and very specialized components of the university that help students of color in particular areas. So like Gillian can't speak for Indigenous people, I can't speak for African American people. I can't say what your experience is, and neither can putting people in these larger multicultural systems and thinking that they're going to be just as successful as those more individualized programs were. And so, and we do see that. We see a lot more Native students choosing not to go to University of North Dakota anymore because it's no longer appealing. There's not that appeal of, okay, when I get there, there's gonna be a home away from home. I'm gonna get the support that I need. These people are gonna understand where I'm coming from because they also grew up on the reservation, or they also come from the rural communities that I came from. So that's one of the disconnects. I think there's others, and I'd love to hear from some of our other participants. I mean, this is supposed to be a water cooler chat, so right now it's been mostly me and Gillian talking, and I'd love to hear, besides in the chat room, other people who want to talk, and feel free to jump in at any time, and we'd like to facilitate.
I'm sorry, I can't find the little hand button. So since nobody's talking, I agree actually with what you said. I'm Latina, and I went up to an undergrad that had specific programs for Indigenous populations as well as Latino populations. And now that undergrad program has now become the multicultural program, which essentially is, I know it sounds counterintuitive, but you've now watered down the entire reason of that program, right? Those programs. And so when you get there, it's no longer, like you described, a place to be home. It's now, look how we are now everything. And they're like, that kind of defeats the entire purpose of being away from home, especially when a lot of, at least from my experience, coming from an urban environment and going to a very remote college to study ecology, right? It was a very, very difficult. And I actually would have probably dropped out. I tell this to people, I would have dropped out of that program if it wasn't for the program that I was in was there. I guarantee you. But since that program was there and I was able to have a home, I stayed. But yeah, I do see this. It's not just a trend, I think, at a university. This is a trend, I think, across governments as well as other areas. It's now, we'll just call it multicultural, and then just, we'll have everybody there and everybody will be happy. And I do think that is an issue. I do agree.
And I'd like to say that, you know, I have not been involved with these issues as much as some others in this water cooler. But I've realized that the questions that are being addressed as environmental justice in other states, let's say water quality issues in related to lead poisoning in Flint, Michigan, are not being addressed in my own state, Connecticut, where lead poisoning of children is one of the highest problems we have in environmental justice in a very rich state, where it could be a half hour away, where one group of individuals is suffering from lead poisoning. A half hour away, we have, in driving distance, we have a very rich people living. So what is considered environmental justice varies from place to place, and this kind of trying to get people to see that the definition applies whether it's urban or rural, that the questions are research questions that are involved really deal with certain demographic group of people being more affected. And when you have lead poisoning and throw on that COVID-19 in the same state, all of a sudden you have this great increase in the disparities that we're trying to address. All of that requires science. This year, we learned that science is being appreciated for helping us solve problems with COVID-19. Well, let's infuse more science into ecology so that we can address environmental justice more carefully. So who else is teaching about issues dealing with justice from the ecological point of view out there?
Well, Carmen, I see a hand raised if we want to call on.
I can't, I couldn't actually see it.
Katera, I'm sorry if I'm saying your name wrong.
Yeah, that's
you
fine.
can. Okay.
Katera.
Yeah.
Hi. So I had been active in the chat, as you can probably see. So when we were invited to say something, I kind of wanted just to clarify some of the things that I kind of was saying. One thing, my environmental justice work is really from a social justice perspective. I'm a geographer, but I did an interdisciplinary degree where it was ecology and geography together. But I was the first person to get a PhD in that program, first Black person, and it was 2014. And so out of Earth and Environmental Sciences, it was just me. And so that tells you, it goes back to these pipelines. So I think that it really, I've done a lot of stuff with middle school and high school students, but they don't see, as Amber already said, they're not seeing people like them where this could be a possible career, or they're not going to the spaces. And that's when I'm saying access. It's, I'm in Philadelphia. So there's Fairmount Park, there's, the Schuylkill River, is all these spaces that are green and potentially, but if you live in a particular neighborhood, you might not be able to go to that space, right? Because you have this race and class element. And then if you go to that space, who are you going to see? Gentrifiers. You're not going to see yourself in that place, right? Or if you go to a facility that, has a nature educator or ecologist, whatever, you're not going to see yourself. And so I think that you have to make authentic pipeline opportunities, but the institutions have to be welcoming, right? So it can't be the multicultural student society. It can't be, we're going to bring in low-income students or whatever, and not fully support them with the range of supports that students need. It's not just the tuition and the books, it's all the things. And, oftentimes institutions aren't thinking about, well, we gave them money for books. We even gave them a computer, but it's, can you really be a full member of the college life? Are the people going to be looking at you some kind of way? Why are you even here? So it's like all these gatekeepers that happen at different levels along the experience. I think for students to even get to the point where they're even majoring and successfully completing a program that has been for white people. A lot of the stuff is white male dominated and continues to be that way because at each stage of the game, students are, maybe it's their high school math or science teacher or they're being discouraged, and so it's a lot of work to be done, just to get the representation before we even start talking about bigger environmental justice issues. It's just that. And then that's when it's people that have these lived experiences will be able to kind of hone in to some of the things that other people take. And I'm sorry, I'm rambling, that other people are taking for granted, you know, like because you don't have to go far to find environmental injustice. It doesn't have to be like just a big city like Philadelphia or whatever. You can, I mean, it could be in a rural area too. So it's just, you have to go outside of your area to understand that it's that there's some environmental injustices happening. And I think it's just, you know, it's just a matter of just educating people and then being intentional, like people are saying in the chat, infusing it into all the courses. So whatever it is that you're teaching, there's an environmental justice component, right? You could be talking about deforestation, right? There's some environmental justice issues there when you're thinking about why are they doing slash and burn? Like what's happening on a global scale with the political economy? You know, when we're talking about poaching or something like that, human wildlife interaction, what is happening? You know what I mean? Like, because we can, you know, I'm gonna stop talking. I'm just rambling. I'm just rambling now. I'm gonna stop talking. I'm gonna put myself on mute.
Mhm.
I'm just going to jump in and I was
Go
going to
ahead.
jump in and say I appreciate your thoughts. I'm from New York City and I'm from from Brooklyn, and I think that there's sort of two parts of thinking, and this gets back to Mark's question as well. And I think you were saying it really quite well. It's not just it's thinking about the whole student, but it's also thinking about the whole question. And I think this issue of co-production of questions and how we get people to think about research that is something that they're interested in or their community in needs to have the community itself and needs to have someone who understands the community itself. It can't be someone who sort of parachutes in to save the day. And, you know, Colorado State is a non-diverse university, to say the least. In our college, we managed to, in the last 6 years, graduate 6 African Americans out of 600 students. So our numbers are horrible, to say the least. So, you know, we teach environmental justice, and that's one way, you know, you can say, well, let's get more students involved. So we had a class last semester on environmental justice. The students have to go do a project. So a group of students come to me and they say, well, we want to do environmental justice. So we're going to go to the Hispanic neighborhood and find out what the environmental justice problem might be. Now, these are ecology students. So that's this lack of access of knowledge and skills. You know, just go out and find the brown community and figure that there's got to be a justice issue there without any ecological issue, without any understanding of the mechanisms that move things around, without any understanding of pollutants and all those other things that are part of the environment, to me, is part of that problem. So when you co-produce that question, you have to get the skill sets within the community. So, you know, growing up in New York, there were times when you couldn't swim in, you know, Coney Island because the beach was too polluted. Right. So why does that occur on that side? But then you go to the other side, Montauk Bay, which is a very wealthy neighborhood, and that beach is never polluted. So just sort of thinking about when these things occur and then asking the question. So this should be how we manage this environment. How do we manage the water within Central Park or Plaster Park so people can put their feet in it without getting pollution or without getting rashes and other things? And thinking about how that is a part of a justice question, that access to nature and that access to nature that should be healthy. So thank you for your thoughts. I appreciate that.
I see Jorge has joined us now. Jorge, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do?
Hi everyone, thanks Amber. Oh, I just want to listen. This is awesome. This is the most amount of people at an EJ reunion themed of ESA that I've ever seen. So this is amazing. I hope y'all take action in our homes and at ESA and nationally too. So yeah, my name is Jorge Ramos. I am a SEEDS alumni. I always like to start with that. And I'm the Associate Director for Environmental Education at Jasper Ridge, right here at Stanford in California. And then I'm also the chair of the Environmental Justice section of ESA. And yeah, I work with Amber and Jeremy quite a bit. And this is amazing. I think it's really hopeful. I think I'm an optimist. I'm a positive optimist, which in these times it's hard. But yeah, I just love listening to all the conversations that you're all having because sometimes we just hang out with our own friends, our own EJ passionate friends, and we don't get to hear from the younger people that are actually going through this process and when we talk about putting students in programs, we don't actually hear from them. We just try to put them in programs. And I don't think that's right sometimes. I think we should also listen, what do they actually want? And I was actually in an outreach project just right now, and it was mainly Hispanic students. And they were asking me questions about like, why do we have that pressure of leaving home to go pursue our education somewhere else? Like, why is grad school always that push of moving away from our families? Like, why is academia valuing like that I have to go somewhere else? When in fact, if they want to do environmental justice environmental justice work, it's with their own communities, with their own families, with their own, but why do we value that? Like, I'm a victim of that. I've been in 10 different cities. Now I live really far from my family, but somehow I took that pill of like, oh, I need to go somewhere else to like be successful. But I keep my network of all my friends. But I think this is good for ESA. We have a lot of work to do. And Amber, Jeremy, and I are looking forward to seeing what happens out of this, and then keep all of us engaged. One last plug. Yesterday I saw the talk by Dr. Chris Schell from UW Tacoma, and he just presented that article on him and his colleagues that they wrote on how do they incorporate environmental justice into their biodiversity uh, research, and I strongly recommend it. I'll put the link on the chat.
That's fantastic, Jorge, because that's the issue I hear. Well, I really love to talk more about environmental justice in my classroom, but I don't understand how to connect it more to ecology. And it is because, as several people in the chat have indicated, it's the kind of questions that we ask as ecologists tend to avoid dealing with the human dimension. So we're trying to bring that back in, bring back the human dimension discussion as being part of ecology. And back in 2003, both Bruce Grant and George Middendorf, who are here, told us, it's time to integrate, environmental justice into our research. And here we are 17 years later, still talking about this, but how have we changed? Bruce, what do you think has changed in that amount of time?
Oh gosh, I didn't expect that. Thank you for the plug, but let me, I'll yield to the first author in a moment. I'll just read one line, which is that the last paragraph of the missive that George and I wrote, and I'm going to drop the PDF in the chat in a minute, is that, where is it? Okay, ecologists need to develop a more inclusive ecology. And that was 17 years ago. And I'm really enjoying seeing that happening. And that's, I think, we need to sort of step a little back and celebrate some success in those areas, that things have really improved in a more inclusive ecology. But there's a long way to go, and that's all I'm saying now. George, Charlie and Leanne were there too, who are on the call.
Yeah.
It looks like Charlie has his hand raised. Charlie, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I guess I was going to come out a little bit different direction, but one thing I thought about, and I've just been saying some of the comments, I think there are 2 points. I think the first point is that I think it's valuable to look at examples of what people actually are doing, because sometimes we tend to talk about, that no one's doing this, and sometimes it's worthwhile to look at what actually is there. And I think, as Dr. Moore mentioned, a lot of the work that's being done may not be done by who we often think of as ecologists. So I think one thing always to consider is that ecologists at times have a very specific meaning of what they define as ecology. So sometimes taking a broader look at that may pull in more things. But the thing I really wanted to get as far as maybe how you look at things in courses, getting students engaged. I think one way is to use readings, to use examples, to use things which talk about the science that underlies environmental justice issues. And there are references out there, about inequalities and disparities and exposure to pollutants. There are issues about food. There are all kinds of issues you can use. So I know what I've tried to do in my classes is incorporate those into that, and always stressing that the science is there, but that science is embedded in this broader picture about issues of inequality, about all kinds of issues that surround justice. So I think the important thing is really to look for issues and really challenge ourselves and challenge our students to really look at those issues, because they are out there and they're maybe not as far away as we sometimes try to make them.
I think that we're not actually thinking of how ethics integrates into the teaching of ecology, which is something we're trying to push in the new curricular framework, the four-dimensional ecology education curricular framework. Ethics is a component of ecology. In order to deal with climate justice issues, we have to deal with ethics. And so we have to change what the questions are to integrate these other principles into our teaching. Who's doing that out there now?
I think this also ties back to what Jeremy was talking about when we say that waiting until college to introduce some of these concepts and ideas to students is already too late. And so some of the work that he's doing and some of the work that I do, we work with middle school and high school students, and in some cases that's even almost too late. What I've seen over time here, and I've kind of been an educator for quite a few years now, is that the younger that you start introducing these concepts and ideas to students, especially around the idea of inquiry-based education, teaching students to ask questions and to explore those questions and to try to find the answers and then continue to ask more questions. That really helps to start the baseline of how they look at problems in the world, no matter what field they fall under. And so we start teaching children to be problem solvers rather than just learning facts and then regurgitating them to us. And so it makes the topic a lot more personal, right? Because kids often already have some idea about, they have a lot of good questions. And if they were to have the guidance of people who have that expertise to help flow that problem solving along, they would be able to be more equipped to going into their upper level grades, approaching science a lot differently. Because really, we are not a very good, not everybody, but I mean, there's a lot of great examples out there of people who are doing inquiry-based learning and teaching students how to be more engaged with wanting to do more in science. And we see those students very successful as they move through their grades. And then as they move into college, choosing professions that are either STEM or related to STEM in some way. And I think the younger, the better. And I mean, that's just my personal opinion.
I was going to jump in if I could, and but maybe some pushback in that, the National Science Foundation did the Vision and Change document, and it's now been more than 10 years. And one of the things they tried to do in the Vision and Change was ask about the participation in the sciences. And for African Americans in particular, and again, being very cautious because the findings were different for different groups, but for African Americans in particular, they entered the academia or the academic field with the same interest in science relative percentage as white students, but failed to graduate. And their point was, the National Science Foundation, was that the issue is within academia. It is within the academy, in that students entering with the similar interest in science are not graduating in the science field at the same rate. So we're discouraging them in the process as we go on. And for African Americans, that's particularly true. And so one of the questions, I thought I saw Alan Berkowitz on this call, was the question is, why does that occur, and why does that occur so often in the environmental sciences? In the environmental sciences, I used to be in the National Park Service, and can say now that I got a lot of gray hair, we sort of got tired of waiting for those fourth graders to grow up. The numbers have not moved for a long time, for African Americans in particular. Since 2004, we have not changed. All people of color still more or less consist about 5% of STEM PhDs, and African Americans have not budged. So I think we just need to take a look at, it's not just the younger students, they're very valuable in the pipeline, but we're also losing them within our institutions. So what are we doing as a discipline that causes these students to disappear? And they're choosing not to graduate in a field. And I think that's something we have to be really careful about. And Carolyn Finley wrote a wonderful book, Black Faces and White Spaces, that tried to address just that. Why do we lose all these students who start out interested in these fields, but they don't graduate in these fields?
I see Leanne has her hand up. Leanne, would you like to add to the conversation?
Hi, everybody. So I had some comments back earlier in the feed, but I'll add to this one and just broaden from some other perspectives as well too. I do think, one of the challenges I remember, and I don't know if it's shifted, that in environmental education, we were told, be careful with younger learners, don't overwhelm them or paralyze them with the doom and gloom scenarios of what's happening with climate change and all. And then others would say, yeah, but if they're already experiencing it in their neighborhoods, there's no need to worry about some of the the pollution or the impacts that they might be experiencing already. So how do we broaden, continue to broaden it, and so help people see the relevance of addressing justice concerns as part of the science and the inquiry process as we're talking. The one of the allies, so I'm a Catholic sister, and I've been engaged with the ESA for almost 3 decades now. And I felt, kind of outside initially. I'm a climate change scientist as well. And just, it took time to feel comfortable to reveal that cultural part of myself as my faith community, my spiritual community. And that community is part of what helped really support environmental justice move as a movement as part of civil rights coming out, and some faith-based studies of the impact of toxin on cancer rates in African American communities. And that continued raising it as a moral issue. So there's many faith-based institutions that are trying to do this and certainly hold that commonality of disproportionate impacts on people is something we need to care about and is part of our education. So that is, one group of allies for this work. I'd also like to say I've been part of a lot of discussions and learning and doing the white people work this year, trying really hard on anti-racism and really understanding the stories, and been in a discussion group really looking at what's happened to our First Peoples and what have we done as religious people that have contributed to that as well. And so part of the question in broadening it too, I'd also like to raise, okay, what's the white people work in the environmental justice movement? I have been part of ESA's EJ from the beginning and really continue to raise it, and how do we continue to really create this broad tent together, but really understand where there might be barriers we're not fully aware of that might be preventing us moving forward. So I'll just put that out. I also would love to hear what people are thinking about as proposals are due in mid-January for the next ESA meeting. What are the EJ concerns for workshops or for continuing this kind of interaction that can continue to work for us too. Thank you all for a very engaging time.
Thank you, Leanne. I see Carolyn. I'm going to chop up this last name, but Jezierski. Would you like to talk?
You got it exactly right. I was just wondering, the comment of that there's the same number of African American students starting off at college or university with the interest, but not graduating. I'm curious as to whether or not those students ended up graduating at all. And the reason why I'm curious is when I went to get my master's degree, my parents don't have master's degrees. And when I went to get my master's degree, I felt sort of like an imposter, like I didn't necessarily belong there. And there were a lot of people getting their master's degrees or PhDs where their parents had masters and PhDs, and they just naturally they felt like they belonged there. That's what they were meant to do. Their parents had done that. And so I'm just curious whether or not maybe whether or not some of the students are first generation students, so the first of their family to go to college, and whether they're feeling like that, like, well, I don't know if I'm really supposed to be here. And if that is one of the challenges to why some of those students aren't finishing up in the environmental science field or in other science fields.
I guess I can answer that one. And I'm not sure if I remember whether Charlie or other people were involved with Vision and Change when it came out. A guy named Charles Sutherland was the lead from NSF, National Science Foundation, and National Academies of Science. They just had a decade revision of that report. It's a really excellent report to answer that question. But in some ways, it does get back to the foundation of environmental justice. When you parse through all the issues of environmental justice, like Robert Bullard did several decades ago, the question, does income help predict? Does this help predict? Does that help predict? And what he found was the best predictor was color, or the demographic, the race of the community. And the same thing, I think, is what Vision Change is saying. It's not, and you have to parse through, why does one particular group seem to be pulled out of the system versus another group, and pay attention to those dynamics. So again, like I said earlier in the talk, I mean, and I think we just had an incident with one of our Hispanic students in the state of Wyoming. And one of the things that we talked about with the other students after this happened was that, so if I say the word ice, that doesn't mean a cold drink. It means something else to different students. So we need to think about what that term ice means, especially if you're a dreamer. That's a very specific issue to that population. What happened to Chris Cooper is very specific to Black Lives Matters. I've had the police called on me. Somebody put it in their chat. Yeah, you never go out in the dark as a Black person, to go chase owls. Are you kidding? Or my friend Drew Langton would say, you never ever go birding with a hoodie on. It's just not safe. Security is a big issue that pops up for that population. It does not pop up for an economic disadvantaged population. It does not pop up for a white population. So I think it's important that we keep that in front of us, that there are places where race matters, and who you are matters, and how you succeed in the science field makes a difference.
Yes. And Gizelle, did you have a question before? I didn't, react correctly.
Actually, I had a statement. I've been pretty involved in reworking the gatekeeper courses. So a lot of what Gillian was talking about, how we lose a lot of underrepresented peoples in the sciences, and a lot of that comes down to, when you look at the numbers, comes down to gatekeeper courses, chemistry, biology, those major courses, and I teach one of those. And so there's quite a bit of work looking at how to, or trying to revamp those courses. So some people brought those up about actually doing them as flipped classrooms, right? And so instead of just here memorize all of this information, and go that way and move on, it's more like, okay, learn this information and be able to work with it. And that's a broader conversation beyond ecology, because usually our eco classes or environmental science classes are passive gatekeeper classes, right? So you have to either have already taken that or concurrently or something along those lines. So a lot of times this has to be addressed on a college level beyond just ecology, and that's a harder thing to do. And so I wanted to bring that up and make sure that when you have these conversations at your home institutions, it's sometimes a broader conversation, maybe even collegially or with your fellow professors who teach those gatekeeper courses.
Thank you. We have two hands up for Katira Moore, who's up, and then Nicole Feltz.
I'm not going to ramble again, but what I just wanted to say as far as the imposter syndrome and what happens with students. So while that imposter syndrome is true, and we know that it happens a lot with women, it's a little bit different with students of color or first gen students, because it's, do you have a right to be here? Like versus this kind of internalized, like, oh, am I good enough or whatever. It's where you might have interacted with a fellow student or a professor that actually has questioned your right to be there. And you see that, you know, like in Philadelphia, we have magnet high schools. And one of the counselors actually did her dissertation research and why students are coming into some of these higher achieving schools, high achievers in math and science, and leaving out lower achievers. And it's because it's the teachers questioning your abilities, questioning, you know, and kind of beating you in your head where you're not really that interested in STEM anymore. And all summer long, almost every school, the private schools, you know, the little Ivies, the big Ivies, we have Quaker schools here in Philadelphia, the private, you know, the magnet schools, students, one after another, they talked about their experience, how they changed from math or they changed from science or computer programming because they were in the class, or the advisor or the guidance counselor said, are you sure you can do that? I think this would be better for somebody like you. Time and time again, you know, prestigious schools where people graduated. One student mentioned how at the graduation, the dean is like, oh, we didn't think you would make it. Somebody like you would make it. So this microaggression stuff that's happening, that's the things that are stopping people from being successful in STEM and just in college in general. So it is, while imposter syndrome does exist, the reality of the situation is that it is these gatekeepers, right? So it's the people that think that because the field looks like who the field looks like. So when you're somebody that's different, it's, do you have the right to be here? Are you some affirmative action, admit, and do you have the capacity to do the work? And so you constantly have to prove yourself, and that's exhausting. It's exhausting for a student in a school that's maybe struggling to be there, maybe they don't have a family to call and say, hey, mom, I'm really struggling with this. And so they have to, you know what, they might just need to just get out faster than deal with what's going on in organic chemistry or something like that.
That's great to hear. And we have one last question, I think, from Nicole.
Let's do Nicole's last comment and then let's wrap it up. This is such a great conversation. I hate to say that we got to wrap it up, but we're at the top of the hour. So go ahead, Nicole.
Hi there. Sorry about that. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I'm a first generation college attendee, and I just got my master's earlier this year. And the one thing that I wanted to add was that I definitely felt very lost throughout my entire graduate school process because I did not have an example set for me. And I didn't know some of the things that you just don't know what you don't know. And so there were a lot of things that I didn't even know that I should be asking questions about. I didn't know what the functionality of advisee relationships were supposed to look like. I am not a minority group other than the fact that I'm a female. I'm a Caucasian female. So I can't speak to those types of experiences, but I wanted to share that bit about being a first gen college attendee. And I honestly didn't realize how much of a disadvantage that put me at until after my graduate school education was over. So, you know, if I could share even the smallest thing to help someone else not have to go through that experience and be not just more welcomed by one, but to really understand school is supposed to look like and what questions you should be asking and what type of help you should be asking for and stuff like that. I think that would be really nice to see just the culture be overall more inclusive, which is essentially what I've heard throughout the conversation today.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for your comments, Nicole. Carmen, Amber, Gillian, any closing thoughts?
I give it to Gillian because she has the gift of, storytelling.
Well, I was noticing Amber's comment in the chat about storytelling, and I think that is a good way to close. I think we think about stories as non-scientific, and I think when you look about environmental justice, it's often about a story with a community plus a resource, and a story with a community that's trying to understand what's happening to a resource or not happening to a resource, or what's happening to their own community or what's not happening to your own community. So I think the power of storytelling is something that ecologists don't like to see as science. And as we move into acknowledging that traditional ways of thinking can be and that's where I would truly use the term non-Western, and where you can look at different ways of knowing the environment and different ways of looking at things. That's what we need to sort of think about with environmental justice. So as an ecologist, an African-American ecologist, I would ask questions, that my white colleague may not even see. And that's an important part of our growth as a discipline, to say, why are those questions not being seen by different people? So how do we make all those questions visible? It's by having a diversity of voices truly co-creating. And the last thing just to say is, when we do co-production of knowledge, understanding the community, respecting the elders in the community, respecting the community members is so important. What a Black student will tell me will be different than what a Black student will tell a white professor coming in. And just understanding that difference will change how you ask the question, and it will change what your research is. But if you don't understand that question and you don't see it, then you've lost that opportunity to engage an audience. So thank you for that.
Very well said, Gillian. And I think all of these comments have been incredible. We have so much interaction going on in the chat. I want to thank all three of you, Carmen, Amber, Gillian, and our special guests, Jeremy, Jorge, Charlie, Nylon. There's so many out there that are very engaged in this topic, and I'm so thankful that we had an opportunity to discuss. Let's keep the conversation going. We will post this video on ESA's water cooler chat page, so please be on the lookout for that and share with folks that couldn't make it today. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you, Jessica. You keep us going.
Glad you all could make it.